Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're continuing our previous discussion and diving deeper into psychology, quantum mechanics, and Maria Von Franz's work. In recent years, there has been a growing dialogue between depth psychology and quantum physics, exploring how the symbolic language of the psyche might intersect with the strange realities of the quantum world. This discussion often centers on ideas from Jungian psychology, especially the work of Marie-Louise von Franz, alongside emerging theories of quantum consciousness, such as those proposed by physicist Federico Faggin. Both perspectives, though coming from very different traditions, grapple with bridging mind and matter, the subjective and the objective, into a unified understanding. In this episode, we're going to dive into von Franz's contributions, her insights into symbols, number archetypes, alchemy, and synchronicity, and examine how they resonate with modern quantum concepts like quantum information, non-locality, and even the notion of a 4D hypersphere of reality. We'll explore the intersection of symbolic systems and unconscious processes within quantum mechanics, the parallels between psychological individuation and quantum state collapse, and the implications of these ideas for Nassian quantum psychology. The journey will be wide-ranging but accessible, hopefully, aiming to illuminate how ancient archetypes and cutting-edge physics might be describing facets of the same underlying reality. Who is Marie-Louise von Franz? A Swiss Jungian psychologist born in 1915, von Franz was a close collaborator of Carl Jung for over 3 decades. She became a leading figure in analytical psychology and helped shape and expand Jung's seminal concepts. She also struck out in new directions, particularly in the study of fairy tales, alchemy, and number symbolism. Her prolific writings sought to illuminate what Jung called the objective psyche, the collective unconscious, by interpreting its manifestations in myths, dreams, symbols, and even the patterns of numbers and matter. Von Franz's work is characterized by deep conviction that psyche and material reality are reflections of one another, connected through meaningful patterns and symbolic correspondences. One of von Franz's major contributions was as a scholar of alchemy, the medieval art of transforming base metals into gold, which, fun fact, CERN did just do this by colliding lead particles together. So that's not something that we can do with, like, urine and magic. It's not going to happen like that, not like in movies. Jung had pioneered the idea that alchemical symbols actually describe a process of psychological transformation or individuation, and von Franz carried this further. So instead of saying this is real literal, like you can turn lead into gold using natural materials or certain chemical combinations, she's like, no, this is actually the steps for interpersonal transformation. She illuminated alchemy's symbolic processes as analogies for individuation and the integration of the psyche. In works like Alchemy, An Introduction to the Symbolism and the Psychology, and her commentary on Aurora Consurgens, an alchemical treatise attributed to Thomas Aquinas, von Franz showed how the cryptic imagery of alchemists expressed deep psychological truths, and not a roadmap for riches. In Alchemy, her view provides a symbolic map for the ego's encounter with the unconscious. Her opus work begins with chaos and disintegration, like the stage of blackening, and ends in the harmonious integration of the self, or the alchemical gold. In practical terms, individuation, or the process of becoming one's true whole self, follows a similar arc of dissolution and recombination of psychic elements. Franz emphasized that the alchemist's work was not just a metaphor. They genuinely toiled with physical substances, yet their material quest for gold was actually a spiritual discipline. It was a yoga of the West, aimed at transmuting the soul alongside matter. This link between psychic and physical transformation pointed for von Franz to a mysterious interface of psyche and matter, the place where inner and outer worlds meet. In fact, she suggested that individuation has a cosmic dimension, reflecting the greater alchemy of nature itself. Our souls, like fractals, may grow according to patterns of transformation that are identical with those in the broader universe. Another domain where von Franz bridged psyche and matter was in her pioneering interpretation of numbers. Building on Jung's intuition that number is a fundamental archetype of order, von Franz argued that numbers carry qualitative meaning and reflect the deepest patterns of psychic organization. Her magnum opus, Number and Time, in 1974, explored how numerical structures appear in mythology, dreams, ancient philosophy, and modern science, suggesting that numbers have served as numinous vessels for archetypal configurations of the objective psyche. For example, she noted that across cultures, the number 1, or the monad, symbolizes primal unity or God, the source of wholeness. 2, the dyad, evokes the archetypal polarity of opposites, male, female, light, dark, yin, yang. 3 suggests a resolving or meditating principle, the third that reconciles the opposites. And 4, the quaternity, signifies completeness and stability, and often associated with the wholeness of the self. These archaic symbolic meanings of numbers hint that our mathematical order might be rooted also in archetypal order. Indeed, von Franz demonstrated that numerical patterns underlie not just mysticism and myth, but also the frameworks of modern life, from the binary code of computers to quantum equations of physics. In her view, numbers have a dual nature. They're both quantities and symbols of meaning. This mirrors Jung's own observation that a number is as much discovered as it is invented, its quality as well as meaning. Jung even speculated that number may be a key to the mystery of how psyche and matter align, an archetype of order bridging the two realms. Von Franz took this idea seriously, proposing that by studying numerical archetypes, we gain insight into the structure of the psyche, and perhaps the structure of physical reality itself. Such insights challenge the modern tendency to treat numbers as purely quantitative, and instead, von Franz invites us to a renewed appreciation of the qualitative, symbolic dimension of numbers, its power to convey meaning and value, not just measurement. This stance subtly suggests that the mathematical laws governing the cosmos and archetypal patterns guiding the psyche might be reflections of one another, an idea that edges intrinsically close to certain views of theoretical physics and philosophy. Perhaps the most famous concept linking psyche and matter in Jungian thought is synchronicity, and here too von Franz made significant contributions. Synchronicity is Jung's term for the acausal connecting principle, whereby an internal psychological event, a dream, thought, or emotion, finds meaningful parallel in an external physical event, without any apparent causal link between the two. These are the uncanny coincidences that feel too meaningful to be chance. For example, thinking of an old friend at random and moments later receiving a phone call or text from them. Such events suggest to Jung that causality is not the only force at work in the world, that meaning itself might be an organizing principle in nature. Marie-Louise von Franz delved deeply into this topic, becoming a leading interpreter of Jung's concept of synchronicity. In her book on divination and synchronicity, The Psychology of Meaningful Chance in 1980, she explored how synchronicity manifests across cultures, in ancient oral practices like the I Ching, in medieval astrology and magic, and in modern anecdotes and parapsychological research. She found a universal human fascination with these meaningful coincidences, suggesting that they tap into something fundamental about how mind and reality relate. For von Franz, synchronicities were not mere curiosities or paranormal flukes. Rather, she saw them as an expression of the objective psyche's holistic patterning, the way archetypal meanings weave themselves into the fabric of existence. In other words, a synchronicity is like a momentary eruption of underlying order. The psyche and the physical world momentarily fall into alignment, revealing an ordering principle that transcends the division between the inner and the outer worlds. When an outer event mirrors an inner state in a striking way, it hints that both are being orchestrated by the same deeper pattern or archetype. They're in alignment. Von Franz believed that recognizing synchronicities can expand our worldview. It challenges the strict materialistic assumption that mind and matter never interact except through direct physical causation. Instead, we are prompted to envision reality as an interconnected web of meaning, where mind and matter are intertwined. She even spoke of this as a radical re-envisioning of reality that bridges the split between mind, matter, inner and outer, psyche, and world, moving towards a new kind of science that honors subjective symbolic dimensions alongside of objective facts. Importantly, Von Franz was discerning. Not every odd coincidence is a capital S synchronicity. She advised a discriminating, open attitude. One should not force connections or see omens everywhere, but remain open to genuine, meaningful coincidences when they naturally arise. Those genuine synchronicities, in her view, might be glimpses of the unus mundus, the one world of unified reality that Jung and physicist Wolfgang Pauli conjectured, a level where psyche and matter are not separate things at all. In fact, Jung suggested that the unus mundus, there is no incommensurability between so-called matter and so-called psyche. They're just two aspects of one underlying transcendental background. In summary, Maria Von Franz's work provided a rich historical and symbolic bridge between psychology and physics. She showed how symbolic systems, whether the alchemical opus, mythic numbers, or synchronistic patterns, suggested an underlying unity of mind and nature. She revived ancient ways of knowing, symbolism, myth, and divination, and showed they are not at odds with modern science, but rather complementary, pointing towards a reality where mind and matter form an interconnected whole. This Jungian foundation sets the stage for our exploration of how these ideas resonate with and inform modern quantum theories of consciousness. On the scientific side of the dialogue, one of the prominent recent thinkers is Federico Faggin, a physicist and inventor best known for leading the design of the first microprocessor, who in later years turned his attention to the hard problem of consciousness. Faggin brings a rigorously technical perspective to questions that fascinated Jung and von Franz. What is the relationship between mind and the physical world? Could consciousness yet be an intrinsic aspect of the fabric of reality? Faggin's answer, intriguingly, is yes. Together with physicist Giacomo d'Ariano, he has developed a theoretical framework sometimes called quantum information panpsychism, or QIP, QIP. In essence, Faggin proposes that consciousness is not an emergent byproduct of brain complexity, but a fundamental feature of reality. Specifically, that quantum information and quantum fields are themselves imbued with conscious experience and even a form of free will. In Faggin's theory, the physical body and brain are viewed as quantum classical machines, controlled or animated by a conscious quantum informational field. He suggests that what we call a particle or a quantum field might not be a mindless bit of matter at all, but rather something that feels or experiences intrinsically. This is a form of panpsychism, the idea that consciousness, or at least rudiment of experience, is present at all levels of reality, perhaps even in elementary particles. But Faggin grounds this idea in information theory and quantum mechanics. According to his model, and I would agree, consciousness is the fundamental ontological category, and it gives rise to information. That information, when structured quantum mechanically, gives rise to quantum physics, and from quantum physics emerges classical physics. In other words, Faggin inverts the usual scientific assumption. Instead of matter, brains, consciousness, he posits consciousness, quantum information, matter. This hierarchy implies that if we drill down far enough into the nature of matter, we eventually encounter something like mind, a unified field of experiential information. A key motivator for Faggin's approach is the privacy of subjective experience and the holistic, non-reducible nature of consciousness. Classical bits of information, the zeros and ones in a computer, for instance, have no intrinsic feeling. They're purely syntactic. But Fagan asks us to consider that perhaps at the quantum level, information is different. In a 2021 paper, he and Duranio argued that the kind of information involved in consciousness needs to be quantum, in part because of its intrinsic privacy. Only you experience your thoughts, and because of its ability to build up thoughts by entangling qualia states. And here qualia refers to the raw sensations of experience, the redness of red and the smell of a rose, things that you can experience on the inside, that you can take in. The idea is that your experience of, say, an apple is a combination of entanglement of visual qualia, taste qualia, texture qualia, etc., bound together in one unified perception. It's why I can say red is red, but your version of red might not be red. My background looks purple to me, but to you it might look pink. That's the perception. It's the same color of light, but how we intake it and what we experience is completely subjective to us. And even though you call my lights red and I call my lights red, maybe your red is my purple. We don't know, because your interpretation and your inside is different. Your qualia is different. That's what he means by the privacy of information. The holistic binding of experience has long puzzled neuroscientists. It's related to the binding problem in consciousness studies. Fagan suggests that quantum entanglement might naturally account for the binding. Entangled quantum states can tie together separate elements into one state without a classical mechanism, just as consciousness ties disparate sensations into one moment of awareness. So, for instance, when we think of what does a rose smell like, we can both envision holding the rose, smelling the rose, seeing the rose. Moreover, Fagan's theory entertains a provocative idea about free will. In quantum physics, when a measurement occurs, the outcome is usually said to be probabilistic. The quantum wave function collapses to one result or another by chance. But if consciousness underlies the quantum state, perhaps the particular outcome selected is not random at all, but chosen by the conscious aspect of the system. In his paper, Fagan describes the conscious internal state as ontic quantum state, a true, definitive state from which the outside appears random or epistemic to an observer. The unpredictable outcome of a quantum measurement in this view is interpreted as the free will of the system making a choice. In other words, when a quantum event has multiple possible outcomes, the conscious aspect of nature decides which outcome manifests, a radical but intriguing explanation that would tie the mystery of wave function collapse to the mystery of conscious decision. And if correct, Fagan muses, this approach could solve mysteries around the interpretation of quantum mechanics, like why and how collapse happens at all, at the same time explaining consciousness. Fagan's quantum information panpsychism is still speculative, but importantly, it aims to be scientifically testable. He and Ariano discuss potential experiments, for instance, involving phenomena that would differ if consciousness had a direct quantum role. Perhaps subtle violations of statistical predictions or new correlations indicating free will inputs at the quantum level. The theory resonates with other modern ideas. Is it non-reductive? Consciousness reduced to classical brain activity, and holistic. The theory resonates with other modern ideas. It is non-reductive, so consciousness isn't reduced to classical brain activity, and holistic. It echoes the spirit of earlier proposals like physicist Sir Roger Penrose's view that consciousness might relate to quantum gravity, or philosopher David Chalmers' suggestion of an information-based panpsychism. What's striking is how some of Fagan's concepts align with Jungian ones, the idea of an underlying mental reality on holistic entangled states, and the concept that choice meaning is fundamental compared to Jung's psychoid realm or the unus mundus, the archetypes that tie together the inner and outer events, and synchronicities, or the archetype of mind and underlying order. Let's explore some of these further. And first, let's look more directly at how symbolic archetypes and quantum theory might be seen as two languages for the same deeper patterns. One of the most fascinating intersections between Jungian thought and quantum science lies in the realm of patterns and mathematical order. Jung and von Franz believed that the archetypes of the collective unconscious include fundamental ordering principles that can manifest both psychologically and physically. As mentioned previously, Jung suspected that number was one such archetypal principle, a kind of primordial ordering factor in the cosmos. He noted how numbers seem to be discovered and invented simultaneously, an idea suggesting that numerical structures exist out there in nature, sort of like the orbital ratios of planets, the symmetry of crystals, the quantization of energy levels, how 0 is 0, how 1 is 1, and those are definable being what they are. They're intrinsically discovered and invented, and are reflected in here in the psyche, in our innate sense of numbers, the numerical motifs of myths, etc. Modern science is too struck by the uncanny effectiveness of mathematics in describing reality. Physicist Eugene Wigner famously wrote about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences. Some scientists and philosophers even muse that mathematics is the fundamental fabric of reality, a view associated with Pythagoreanism or mathematical Platonianism. Jung's viewpoint was slightly different. Number is both quantitative and qualitative, bridging the material and mental by providing a common language of order. And it's something that you hear a lot in science, is math is the language of the universe. Maria Von Franz, Number and Time, delved into this idea with rich examples. To briefly illustrate the qualitative side of numbers, consider how certain numbers show up in physics and seem almost mythic in their significance. For example, the number 4 is pervasive in Jungian psychology as the number of wholeness. Think of the mandala with 4 quadrants or the 4 classical elements. There's also all of the divine numbers, the angelic numbers, repeating numbers, patterns of numbers, etc. You can really get deep with number theory. And intriguingly, physics has 4 fundamental forces. There's 4 space-time dimensions in relativity, and many stable structures like crystals or the DNA double helix with base pair groupings have 4-fold symmetries. So is this just a coincidence? Or does it reflect something deeper about our universe? The number 137 is another almost archetypal number in physics. It's approximately the inverse of the fine structure constant, a mysterious dimensionless constant governing electromagnetic interactions, and it fascinated Wolfgang Pauli, Jung's friend, to the point that he dreamt about it and considered it significant also to the psyche. One thing that I find interesting about it is 7 and 3 and 1 is also 11. So it also reduces to a divine number if you pay attention to numerology or like that sort of stuff. And so while we have to be careful to avoid numerology in the superstitious sense, von Franz's approach was more sophisticated. She gathered cross-cultural evidence that numbers structuring the physical world often carry psychic significance. For instance, binary, or two-ness, underlies computer code, yes-no logic, but also the yin-yang duality in Eastern philosophy and the conscious-unconscious duality in psychology. Trinity, or threeness, appears in Christian theology in the threefold process of thesis and synthesis in Hegelian thought, and interestingly, in the 3 families of fundamental particles in physics. None of these parallels prove anything by themselves, but collectively they hint, at least symbolically, that the human mind's archetypal structures and the architecture of the physical world may spring from the same source. Von Franz wrote that numbers seem to be autonomous entities with their own reality and agency, almost like Platonic forms or living symbols that transcend individual consciousness. They are the skeletal framework of the objective psyche, even as they are the scaffold of scientific laws. This bold idea places mathematics in a mystical light. Perhaps our equations work so well in physics because the universe itself is imbued with the archetypal structure that also shapes our psyche. From the quantum physics side, one could note that quantum theory is profoundly mathematical and pattern-based, often revealing discrete numerical fingerprints in nature, like the Fibonacci sequence. Some physicists have even speculated that consciousness might resonate with certain mathematical structures. For example, Roger Penrose suggested that the very non-computational quality of human understanding might connect with the mathematically complex world of Platonic forms and advanced geometry in fundamental physics, as he explored in books like The Emperor's New Mind. While Penrose's theory is different from Fagin's, both converge on the sense that mind has a place in the deep mathematical order of the cosmos, not as a late anomaly, but as something woven in. The emerging field of quantum cognition also treats the mathematics of quantum theory as a useful model for human decision-making and perception. It uses the form of quantum math to capture the probabilistic and context-dependent nature of our thinking, albeit without claiming neurons are literally quantum computing. This again points to a structural parallel. The logic of the mind and the logic of quantum reality might share similar principles, like complementarity, indeterminacy, superposition of possibilities, and so on. We might also consider the perspective of dual aspect monism, an idea that grew partly out of the Young-Pauli collaboration. Dual Young monism posits that there is one underlying reality, the one world or unus mundus, which has both a mental aspect and a physical aspect. So it is one underlying reality with two aspects, an inner world and an outer world. So that's why it's a dual aspect monism. In this view, an archetype could be thought of as a fundamental pattern of that one reality, which can manifest psychologically whenever observed from the inside, or mind side, and physically whenever observed from the outside, or matter side. Number can be such a pattern, and so could the archetype of self, or wholeness, or of the interplay of opposites. Modern physicists, philosophers such as Bernard Carr, echo this when they propose that we need additional degrees of freedom to model consciousness, perhaps even extra dimensions beyond the familiar four of space-time, wherein those archetypal patterns reside and influence both mind and matter. This brings us to the notion of extra dimensions and the 4D hypersphere in understanding consciousness. Jung's concept of synchronicity, those meaningful coincidences that defy ordinary explanation, finds an intriguing parallel here in the quantum world through phenomena of entanglement. In quantum physics, when two particles are entangled, their properties become linked such that measuring one instantaneously affects the state of another, no matter how far apart they are. This famously led Einstein to deride entanglement as spooky action at a distance, because it appears to violate the classical notion that objects can only influence each other through local interactions in space and time. Decades of experiments have confirmed that entanglement is real. Nature indeed allows non-local correlations that transcend classical separations. Now, quantum entanglement is usually framed in terms of particles, not human-scale events, and it doesn't carry meaning in the human sense. However, the similarities to synchronicities are hard to miss. In both cases, two separate entities show a mysterious coordination without a known physical signal passing between them. In synchronicity, the coordination is between a subjective state of mind and an objective event, or matter. In entanglement, it's between two physical particles or systems and the unrealized reality. Could these phenomena be hints of deeper connectivity woven into the fabric of reality? Some researchers have indeed speculated this connection, and I have all of my sources in the channel bio. I highly recommend going and checking it out. Physicist Wolfgang Pauli, working with Jung, wondered if the statistical acausality of quantum events might be the physical counterpart to the phenomenological acausality of synchronicities. Both, he thought, might arise from a more fundamental level of reality, where the distinction between psyche and matter dissolves. More recently, interdisciplinary scientists have explored what we might call cognitive entanglement or biological non-locality. For instance, a paper by neurobiologist Fred Held analyzed experiments suggesting that quantum non-locality could play a role in mind-brain interactions, possibly allowing mental states to influence physical processes without localized mechanisms. The Held reviews evidence and even proposes experiments to test if mental events can initiate neural events in ways that exploit quantum entanglement or tunneling, and whether conscious experience might involve non-local brain-wide coordination beyond classical neural networks. While this research is on the frontier and, of course, controversial, it represents a serious attempt to scientifically probe the mind's potential non-local aspects. Beyond individual brains, some have extended these ideas to collective consciousness or field theories of mind. The Jungian concept of the collective unconscious itself can be thought of as a field of sorts, a distributed mental realm that isn't localized in any one brain. Biologist Rupert Sheldrake proposed morphic fields that carry information and memory across individuals and time, suggesting a kind of field-based interconnection that could account for phenomena like telepathy or the sense of being stared at. Sheldrake's ideas are not mainstream, but they parallel Jungian thought in treating patterns of information, like archetypes or habits of nature, as existing in an unseen field that transcends space-time separation. Likewise, in mainstream physics, there is the concept of the quantum vacuum field, a substrate that pervades all space, within which all particles are just excitations. Some quantum consciousness theorists wonder if the vacuum, with its entanglement network, could be the carrier of a universal mind. This veers, of course, into speculative territory akin to philosopher Teilhard de Chardin's noosphere, or the idea of a cosmic consciousness field. To be clear, quantum entanglement, as understood by physicists, doesn't involve information or influence traveling faster than light. It preserves causality in a subtle way. It's correlation without classical communication. Similarly, one cannot use entanglement in any simple way to send a message or control things at a distance. It's more like two distant lottery machines somehow always drawing matching numbers. Synchronicity, as an objective phenomena, might likewise be a causal correlation, not a way to control events, but a sign that events are coordinated by meaning. And amongst all of this, it's fascinating to note that quantum theory had to expand the notions of reality and causality, introducing complementarity, uncertainty, observer dependence, etc. And Jung felt psychology had to expand notions of reality and causality to include acausal connections, the reality of psyche, and so on. So in both cases, the neat clockwork of universal classic physics was found insufficient. Modern cognitive science has even embraced the term non-locality in a metaphorical sense. Cognitive psychologist Dean Radin speaks of non-local mind, and even mainstream psychology acknowledges phenomena like emotional contagion and empathy that create synchronicity between individuals at a distance. While those may still operate through ordinary signals like facial expressions or microexpressions, the pattern is of alignment without direct communication of content, which is suggestive of a field-like link. Bridging back to Von Franz, she viewed synchronicity as a glimpse of an underlying unitary reality, where the split between inner meaning and outer event is healed. In Jungian terms, that underlying reality was sometimes dubbed the psychoid level, a deep layer of the unconscious that is neither mind nor matter, and both. A kind of neutral realm or pattern or form that can manifest as either mental or physical. David Peat, a physicist who worked with David Bohm, wrote that even deeper than the collective unconscious lies the psychoid, which partakes of both matter and mind while remaining above their distinction. It is at the level of the psychoid that synchronicities occur. This is a striking statement. It implies that when we experience a synchronicity, we are seeing a direct emergence from that unified psychoid realm into both the psyche and physical world simultaneously. Bohm's own ideas resonate here. He spoke of an implicate order underlying the explicit order of everyday reality. In the implicate order, separation in space and time might be an illusion. Everything is enfolded together, which could naturally account for both quantum entanglement and phenomena like synchronicity or telepathy without violating any laws, because at that deeper level, the laws are different. In summary, synchronicity is the psychological domain and entanglement in the physical domain. Both hint that our universe is more deeply interconnected than classical models allow. While one deals in subjective meaning and the other in objective correlation, both challenge us to find a new framework, perhaps a unified field theory of consciousness and matter. Working on one of those. Whether through Jung's psychoid realm, Bohm's implicate order, or Fagin's conscious quantum fields, the message is that the division between mind and matter may dissolve if we go deep enough. So let's explore a compelling framework for this depth. The idea that our reality might have more than 3 spatial dimensions, or an extra dimension of time, offering a geometrical way to picture how consciousness and the physical world interrelate in the 4D hypersphere. A 4D hypersphere suggests a higher dimensional realm from which our familiar 3D world is merely a slice or a shadow. Mathematically, a hypersphere is a sphere generalized to higher dimensions. For instance, a sphere's surface is a 2D curved space, while a 4D hypersphere's surface is a 3D curved space, akin to a closed universe. We can visualize this idea using concepts like a Klein bottle, a non-orientatable surface where the inside and outside seamlessly merge, suggesting how higher dimensions could connect seemingly separate realities. When applied to consciousness, the concept of a 4D rotating Klein bottle implies a profound idea. Consciousness may not be restricted to the present moment in an ordinary spacetime, but rather extends within a higher dimensional structure that forms the basis of our experience of time, self, and potentially transcendental state. In physics, we already deal with a 4-dimensional reality. Einstein's relativity combines 3D space and 1D time into a unified 4D space-time. In that sense, every particle or person isn't just a 3D object, but a 4D world line, stretching from birth to death through time. A few thinkers have suggested that our consciousness might actually correspond to awareness of this world line, not just the instantaneous 3D slice. For example, Bernard Carr, a physicist and consciousness researcher, argues that what we perceive as the flow of time might be our mind moving along or projecting onto our 4D existence. He notes that according to relativity, the arena of reality is a 4-dimensional space-time, and thus perception is a 4D process, with the brain just being one end of the causal chain. In this view, conscious experience is associated with all the parts of space-time to which the brain is linked via signals. It's as if the mind is not inside the head, but rather the head, or brain, is a localized receiver or nexus for a much larger matrix of consciousness that spans through time and space. One immediate implication of this model is quite provocative. It suggests that memory might not be stored as bits inside brain tissue, but rather that the brain acts as an access key to a part of the 4D space-time where the past event lies. Instead of containing a full record of every event, the brain may contain a tag rather than a trace, linking our consciousness to the original event's coordinates in space-time. This idea, while speculative, elegantly explains certain puzzles, like the elusive physical anagram of memory, and fits with reports of extraordinary experiences. Some near-death experiences, for example, describe witnessing their life as a panoramic 4D view rather than as a scrambled recall, suggesting consciousness can access time dimension in a non-linear way. And a tag or a key rather than event in our brain, when we forget a memory, who hasn't lost their keys? Going beyond the 4th dimension, Bernard Carr and others who have been influenced by thinkers like C.D. Broad and G.B. Priestley from earlier in the 20th century have proposed models with multiple time dimensions. Carr's recent writing posits that one needs a second time dimension to fully account for consciousness. One time dimension, T1, for the physical world and another, T2, for the flow of mental events. In such a 5-dimensional reality, 4D space and 1 time, our phenomenal space-time, the world as experience, is a different slice of reality than the physical space-time scientists measure. This could address questions like, why do I experience now at this particular junction of my world line? If my whole life is a 4D object, what confers the feeling of moving through it? By invoking an extra dimension for consciousness, Carr suggests that personal identity and the subjective now might be defined in that higher space. While highly theoretical, such models show that scientists are actively grappling with how to fit consciousness into our model of the universe in a principled way. It's reminiscent of how adding a fourth spatial dimension can solve certain puzzles. Perhaps by lifting the consciousness problem into a higher dimensional framework, some entanglements between mind and matter become easier to understand. In this model, consciousness would also operate on a Klein bottle, or a non-orientatable surface that seamlessly turns inside and out. It offers a mechanism for how consciousness experiences and evolves. In this model, the inside and outside of the Klein bottle represent different but continuous aspects of consciousness: the subjective inner world and the objective outer reality. The very nature of the Klein bottle, where a path traced along its surface eventually returns to its starting point but inverted, illustrates the cyclical and recursive nature of experience. When consciousness encounters an experiential reference, a thought, a sensation, or an external event, it navigates the Klein bottle. The flow of time isn't a linear progression, but a journey along the bottle's twists and turns. As consciousness moves, it flips from an internal to an external perspective, from a past memory to a present perception, all within the continuous fabric of the Klein bottle universe. This continuous inversion and reorientation through space-time dimensions is the mechanism through which we experience the progression of movements, even though all temporal instances might, from a higher dimensional perspective, coexist simultaneously on the bottle's other surface. Evolution occurs as consciousness constantly reorients itself on the Klein bottle. New experiences don't just add to linear timeline, they cause consciousness to navigate different pathways on the bottle, creating new internal connections and external interpretations. In essence, the Klein bottle provides a dynamic, self-referential structure where consciousness experiences time through its own continuous, interwoven movement across internal and external landscapes, constantly reshaping itself through the very act of experiencing. It's worth noting that many religious and mystical systems effectively invoke higher dimensional realities. For example, in Kabbalah, there are multiple worlds or dimensions of being. In Theosophy, 7 planes of existence. In Hindu philosophy, lokas and the idea that the Atman, self, is beyond the physical plane. These can be seen as attempts to articulate a hyperspatial reality of consciousness. And of course, there's plenty of others. There's heaven and hell in Christianity as well. While those aren't scientific models, of course, they resonate with the notion that our 3D world is nested in or pervaded by a larger reality. In physics, the idea of extra dimensions has concrete motivations, such as string theory's hidden spatial dimensions or the 4D curvature of space in cosmology. If our 3D universe were the surface of a 4D hypersphere, it would mean if you travel far enough in one direction in space, you might loop around and come back, like circumventing a globe. Some cosmologists have indeed considered that space might be finite, curved like that. In physics, the idea of extra dimensions has concrete motivations, such as string theory's hidden spatial dimensions or the 4D curvature of space in cosmology. So let's ground this for a second. Imagine your life as a world line in space-time, essentially a long, wiggly thread in a 4D block. From within your consciousness, you experience as moving along the thread moment by moment. But from a 4D outside view, the entire thread exists. Now, if there's a higher order structure or a pattern that links different parts of that thread, say significant events that form meaningful sequence, you as a 3D cross-section might only see isolated incidents. However, from the 4D vantage point, those incidents are adjacent or connected along a higher dimension of meaning. So if you have a string that goes along, and you lift up the string, you might still experience that as a linear pattern, but somebody from the 4D looks at that and sees that these 2 points are actually more closely related than these points down here. This analogy might help explain how synchronicities could be arranged. If one's psyche extends into the 4D, it would pick up on something in the future or another place in that larger gestalt and generate a symbol or intuition in the present, which then coincides with the actual event when it comes. In effect, the psyche is a 4D antenna rather than a 3D computer, sensitively resonating with patterns in a higher domain. It's speculative, but it provides a conceptual scaffolding for how precognition, telepathy, or intense synchronicities occur without defying physics. In sum, the 4D hypersphere Klein bottle concept in consciousness studies serves as a way to visualize the holistic, all-at-once nature of reality that both quantum physics and Jungian psychology seem to be hinting at. It tells us that the separation we sense between minds, between moments, between mind and matter, may not be absolute. And if we had a God's eye view in a higher dimension, we might see a grand unity where we now see fragments. Whether in Bernard Carr's formal model with an extra time dimension or in an image of the self as a hypersphere, the message is that consciousness might be far less limited by space and time than we assume. The confluence of ideas that we've explored, Jungian symbolism and quantum theory, is leading toward what we might call quantum psychology, or a new paradigm in consciousness studies. What might such paradigm entail, and why does it matter? Firstly, the implications are philosophical. If psyche and matter are deeply intertwined, complementary aspects of reality, then our worldview must shift from a Cartesian dualism, mind separate from matter, or reductive materialism, mind is an illusion, or mere brain activity, to some form of holistic monism or dual aspect theory. And this aligns with a number of contemporary approaches. For example, the field of consciousness studies has seen serious discussions of panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is fundamental and ubiquitous, and idealism, the philosophy that reality is essentially mental. Bernard Kastrup, Don Hoffman, and others have argued that materialism has failed to account for consciousness, and they propose what we call physical reality might in fact be a representation or an interface of that underlying mental realm. These views gain a scaffolding from a kind of interdisciplinary ideas that we've discussed. Jungian theory provides an archetypal and experiential richness to what could otherwise be dry metaphysics, and quantum theory provides a rigorous scientific backbone to what could otherwise be merely personal, subjective insights. Practically and empirically, a quantum-informed psychology could inspire new research, investigating if mind affects matter. Experiments like the Global Consciousness Project explored if human intention can bias random number generators showing tiny deviations, though results are controversial. If consciousness has a quantum aspect, measurable effects might exist, perhaps in microtubules, as Penrose and Hammerhoff theorize with auric Or, suggesting the brain isn't just a classical computer. Another implication is a new understanding of mental health. Concepts like non-local mind suggest therapeutic rapport, synchronicities, or distant healing might be real. Jungian therapists already interpret synchronicities, and some scholars analogize the patient-therapist bond to quantum entanglement. Physicists Francois Martin and F. David Pete even drew parallels between analytic encounters and quantum measurement, suggesting a psychological quantum coherence. These speculative ideas open new avenues, like whether group meditation could produce macroscopic coherence with real effects, as some studies suggest. And I have more videos on that, so go check them out. In cognitive science and AI, a quantum approach might revolutionize understanding of intelligence. Inventor of the microprocessor, and one of my favorite people to talk about, Federico Fagan, states consciousness cannot be computed classically. The future may lie in quantum computing linked with conscious agents or technology guided by conscious quantum particles. Scientifically, a major implication is resolving deep problems, like the measurement problem in quantum physics, could find resolution by integrating consciousness, a path explored by physicists like John von Neumann and Eugene Wigner and revived by Fagan. The hard problem of consciousness might find context if experience is an irreducible part of reality. These are paradigm shifts, elevating consciousness to a cosmic principle akin to the conceptual shift regarding time and relativity theory. Socially and existentially, a unified matter-psyche worldview can be reassuring, suggesting that we are co-creators in a meaningful cosmos. Jung found synchronicities reconnected people with purpose. If quantum psychology gains acceptance, individuals might feel empowered by their linked consciousness, fostering empathy, a scientific backing for all is one. While many scientists remain cautious, as they should, demanding high proof for quantum effects in the brain or consciousness influencing physical systems, interdisciplinary research is crucial. We can't just solve the consciousness problem with math. We gotta use psychology. We gotta study the brain to understand the brain, right? Quantum consciousness conferences and journals indicate a growing interest in this interdisciplinary research. The interplay between Maria von Franz's Jungian psychology and Federico Fagen's quantum consciousness theory, along with related concepts we've discussed, suggests an impending synthesis. While we haven't reached this point, the necessary components are gradually converging. Like the alchemists who patently toiled with their retorts and alembics, anticipating the transformation of base matter into gold, contemporary psychologists and physicists are diligently working through experiments and theories, striving for a similar profound insight. Ultimately, the gold that we seek might be a unified comprehension of consciousness, a philosopher's stone that reveals the sacred within the scientific and the scientific within the sacred. The marriage of Jungian depth psychology and quantum physics invites us to a more enchanted and participatory world. It suggests that meaning is not an epiphenomenon, but a real part of how the universe operates. Our minds aren't isolated bubbles of experience, but are woven into the very fabric of reality, perhaps at levels that are fundamental as space-time and quantum fields. So when we gaze up at the stars or into the depths of an atom, we are gazing into a mirror, sensing aspects of ourselves reflected in the cosmos. Maria von Franz's lifelong work on symbols and patterns and Fagen's bold theories of conscious quantum fields both beckon us towards this more holistic vision. It's a vision that challenges us to expand our science, deepen our psychology, and recognize with both awe and humility the mysterious unity of the psyche and the world. That about wraps it up for today. As always, the sources are in the channel bio. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell like the winners that you are. And I will see you next time.